Woo! Wait, what a minute, wait, no! Oh god, fuck, I broke it! God damn it! Shit! Hey ho, friendos, my name is Duplex. I am your they, he pronoun having host for this year's 2024 PaleoRewind. I've done a paleo video before about Parasitus colossus, or Parasiticavidia as I've lovingly called them in the past, but I kind of just make videos on whatever, and to my shock, through some strange consequence of the domino effect, I got an invitation to be a part of PaleoRewind. Now, Edge specifically said to make this video as me as possible. So obviously I'm gonna deep dive on 3 papers that I really liked, as art that I did surrounding the paper's topics plays in the background. Yeah, that sounds good. If you want a more extensive look at this month's discoveries, I'll point you in the direction of Raptor Chatter's video. I used his video as reference for all the papers that came out during my month, and honestly, he came in so clutch for that. Big shout out to my guy. Love you, Raptor Chatter. Psst. If you like the music that I use in this video, it's by my friend Gonzo. I never asked him how he pronounces his name. You could totally check them out. The intro music that I use is from their upcoming album, so I guess you're gonna have to subscribe to him to listen to that sick-ass intro music when it comes out. Anyway, on to the video! Ceratopsians. Fuck. There is no other way to put it. Well, yes there is, but I'm a degenerate, so... They kick ass! And they added a new Centrosaurine Ceratopsian to the lineup this year, Lokiceratops rangiformis. Found in the Judith River Formation in northern Montana, it's the biggest ceratopsian we have on record, coming in at 5 tons, standing at 2.5 meters or 8.2 feet, and being about 6.7 meters or 22 feet long. This dude's name means Loki's horn head that looks like a caribou. Obviously, this name is a reference to the Norse god Loki, which is extra funny because the skull of Lokiceratops is housed in Denmark, a Norse country right now. The authors stated that this is because Lokiceratops's ornamentation on its frill reminded them of the weapon Loki wields in Norse myth, which is also what I modeled my magical girl's weapon off of. I'll explain why she's a magical girl later, okay? That caribou bit comes from rangiformis, as the family caribou belong to is called rangifer. Why caribou, I'm imagining you asking? Well, it's because of the asymmetrical ornamentation thing Lokiceratops has got going on. It's similar to caribou having asymmetrical horns. The place where this holotype was found is unique in the fact that Lokiceratops was not alone, as they roamed through the coal swamps of the inner western coast of Laramidia 78 million years ago. Now, that in of itself is not necessarily out of the ordinary. It's been hypothesized that an environment is able to handle up to 2 ceratopsians, a centrosaurine and a chasmosaurine. Well, this Lokiceratops paper takes that number and launches a nuke at it. Lokiceratops was not only sharing its environment with a chasmosaurian, Judyceratops tigris, but also 3 other elephant-sized centrosaurian ceratopsians: Medusaceratops lokii, Albertoceratops nemoisi, and Wendyceratops pinhornensis, with Albertoceratops, Medusaceratops, and Lokiceratops all making up the clade Albertoceratopsinae. I feel like the first thing paleo nerds would jump to after hearing that as a reasoning to why that's even possible is niche partitioning, specifically like we see in some tyrannosaurids, who are of 2 separate species, that are able to coexist because they consume different prey due to the size differences between them. Or, as a different example, how Darwin's finches all have different mouth bits, thus they're more adapted to eat different seeds. They're able to share an environment because they're less likely to compete with one another for resources. That being said, Lokiceratops and the others all have very comparable sizes. Yes, Lokiceratops is the biggest, but still. And extremely similar mouth parts. So what gives? And the answer to what gives is endemism. Endemism is when a small population is only found in one specific area. High endemism is when that happens to a lot of species, and it's likely thanks to rapid evolution and turnover. Rapid evolution is theorized to be the key factor in driving high endemism. Rapid evolution could be caused by sexual selection or adaptations to the local environment, or both. Endemism can also be a driver of rapid evolution, though, but only under very specific circumstances, like when two groups get separated from one another and rapidly evolve because of genetic drift. Which makes sense, because there's a big fuck-off Western Interior Seaway right there. It stands to reason that there would be floodplains and such that would restrict movement across Laramidia. And mountains, they exist. But that might not be the cause of high endemism in Centrosaurine ceratopsians, because high endemism exists in the absence of geographic barriers all the time. Not to mention that mountains had not been a deterrent in migration in large-bodied animals in comparatively modern times, so it stands to reason it probably wouldn't be in the late Cretaceous. High endemism is also a super common trait for birds in tropical environments, and birds can literally fly. So, again, what gives? Under the evidence that we have, it's reasonable to conclude that due to a geographic barrier, that's what drove the rapid evolution in Ceratopsinae. Ceratop. Yeah, I said it right. But we just don't know. We aren't gonna know until we dig more of these big bitches out of the ground. It is important to note that this is, to date, the only formation that has had more than one Centrosaurine ceratopsian. So yeah, the factor that's really producing these crazy-ass ornamentations, though, is seemingly, according to the researchers, sexual selection. The authors pull a parallel between birds that have undergone rapid evolution and mostly just changed song and color, leading to a bunch of very similar species that are only able to be told apart by their plumage and songs, to what we see in a small area of overlapping ornamentations instead of songs and color. It's kinda impossible to know if these animals happen to have different coloration or songs to tell each other apart like birds do. But do you think that Lokiceratops' song would have sounded pretty? Because I'd like to think it would. Aw. So what does that have to do with the magical girl I've been drawing in front of this Lokiceratops this whole time? Well, when doing research for this section, I came across the authors unveiling Lokiceratops at the University of Utah, and they graciously recorded it so that I could blame them for putting this silly idea in my head. They made the mistake of saying the frills were the fashion of the time, and I could not get the comparison of frills in clothing and frills in ceratopsians out of my head. And now we have this. I based the Lokiceratops magical girl's outfit off of Norse women's fashion and some extra little frills and bows for flavor. Also, as I said, I based the weapon off of Loki's weapon from Norse myth. So, I imagine this is a Norse descendant who's from Montana and ends up finding like a little dino figure or something, and then, poof! She's the first member of the Ceratopsian sisters. Because this is a whole ass group now, I have to make a whole video designing magical girls based off of these Ceratopsians in particular. I hope that explanation for my weird brain is satisfying enough to explain this. Probably not. I'm not even really blaming the authors for saying fashion. I probably 1000% would have done this regardless. So, like, let's move on. Oh, the Spino Wars, a term I lovingly stole from the Benji Thompson channel because I feel as though it's very fitting with the current situation we have going on with Spinosaurus. It's the dino wars of our time, except instead of it being a heated rivalry to slap your name on and name as many dinos as you can before you die, it's more like a heated discussion about what this dude was doing to get food. Was it a heron-esque lifestyle where it would sit and wait and snap its jaws at prey? Or was it a more croc-like lifestyle where it would pursue its prey by diving for it? This question has been the question when it comes to Spinosaurus since like 2014, when a more aquatic lifestyle was proposed for it. Now, unlike my first paper, I didn't really see anyone talk about this paper, and there were things I do not understand, so if something is missing or I get something wrong, feel free to fill me in the comment section below. Not only am I a degenerate, I am also a certified idiot. But what I do understand about this paper is that it takes 95 taxa and groups them based off of clades and ecology and puts them on a graph. Like, wow. Look at this graph! They're doing this to assess the possible overlap in morphospace between clades and ecology. What the hell does morphospace mean? I don't know. Let me look it up. Hold up. Oh! Just the difference in variations in body types across a species, used to see the, quote, variations in biological forms, end quote. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So, in this first graph, they used supervised clusters and used different colors to represent the different ecologies. Dark blue is aquatic, light blue is semi-aquatic, that's cyan, but whatever, and green, which is terrestrial. On the graph, it's noted that an increase of PC1 or component 1 correlates to an increase in skull size and a decrease in distance from the nares to the interior margin. Also, an increase in terrestriality. While an increase on PC2 or component 2 correlates to skull heights more or less equaling skull length, boxy skull looking ass, progressively deeper set orbits and nares, so a longer distance from the orbit to the dorsal margin, and increasing the distance from the nares to the skull's interior margin. Higher values on this line, whether positive or negative, are associated with an increase in aquatic affinity. Get it? Affinity? Yeah, I'll leave. It was also found that when clades contain taxa from multiple different ecologies, that their morphology remains relatively close in morphospace. Few other things the paper noted from the data that I'm just gonna rattle off here, because I didn't really know how else to do it. Spinosaurus is closest to Pliosaurus caveni in morphospace. All aquatic taxa and semi-aquatic Chircharodontans didn't really occupy that different in morphospace. They were pretty similar. Spinosaurids, excluding Spinosaurus, of course, didn't show any significant differences from any other clade. Storks, herons, terrestrial and semi-aquatic squamates, and semi-aquatic Chircharodontans couldn't be differentiated from one another. Non-spinosaurid theropods were distinct from everyone else, except for semi-aquatic squamates and spinosaurids. Semi-aquatic Chircharodontans were distinct from all other non-aquatic, non-spinosaurid taxa. And lastly, terrestrial ecology pairs were significantly different versus aquatic and semi-aquatic, which couldn't really be distinguished from each other. The supervised clusters didn't yield clusters according to the 3 ecological realms. Cluster 1 was characterized with a narrow skulls, elongated rostra, and substantial distance from the nares to the interior margin. Cluster 2 was characterized by rostral elongation, but different from Cluster 1, by anterio-dorsally elevated nares. Basically, Cluster 2 had a smaller nares to anterior margin, and a smaller distance from the orbit to the dorsal margin. Cluster 3 is just all of the other terrestrial taxa. Very descriptive, thanks. The paper then brought up the correlation that the higher the component 1 score, the more likely you'll have a lack of rostral elongation. Now, the unsupervised clustering produced 2 clusters, as seen in this graph. Cluster A includes taxa with elongated skulls and long nares to anterior margin distances. Taxa were all either semi-aquatic or aquatic. Cluster B has taxa with short nares to anterior margin distances, and it includes all terrestrial taxa, semi-aquatic squamates, and non-phytosaur cucurodontans. Again, I really hope that I'm saying that right. So these 3 ecological realms are not supported by the data, and there's some messy shit happening with morphology, because 2 morphotypes can attain the same outcome in rostral elongation, but differ in which part of the rostrum is elongated. The nares anterior, such as in cluster A, or posterior, seen in cluster B. In general, rostral elongation usually equals a taxa being semi-aquatic or aquatic. This led the authors to conclude that separation in morphology could be more influenced by diet than ecology. Now, I haven't really spoken about good old Spino Boy because most of the paper was primarily talking about the data itself and the conclusions that they reached with the dataset. That being said, it was found that the nares placement of Spinosaurus is beneficial when it comes to the heron-like lifestyle, and it neither helps nor harms the croc-like one. Across all theropods examined, the positions of the nares and the orbit to the nasal remain relatively constant. Lastly, it seems like birds and Spinosaurus elongation of the anterior to the nares evolved to increase striking range, jaw closing speed, and the amount of skull that needs to be under the water while trying to catch dinner. And they both seem to have gotten this adaptation from eating in aquatic environments. So basically, put another tally mark for the heron-like lifestyle for Spino. Good. Now, the piece I did here was partly based off of ancient Egyptian art, because Spinosaurus was originally found in Egypt. I am somewhat ashamed to admit that the Egyptology cover is what really inspired the sun disk in the back, while some of the beautiful work on King Tut's death mask served as inspiration for the color palette. Now, thinking about it, I probably should have made the yellow parts look more gold, but a little late now. I tried to show off my support for the heron-esque lifestyle by having Spinosaurus flipping a fish in the air like herons and storks do sometimes. Pretty simple overall, but I do like it, so. Now last, but certainly not least, a segment that I've had to re-record 4 times because the audio hates this section for some reason. Like, what is up with that, CapCut? What? Why? Anyway, this was one of the main reasons why I chose this month. If there's something you should know about me, it's that I love archaeology, I love myths, and I love paleontology. So anytime they have a crossover episode, I lose my mind. So you can imagine, when I first heard about this geomyth, yes, that is the actual term, geomyth, the idea that Protoceratops fossils influence the creation or just the general folklore of the Griffin, I was over the moon ready to believe it. And I did, for many years. And I parroted this myth with no second thoughts to my friends, relatives. Then I read this paper, and it lays the facts out pretty succinctly. This myth is shaky at best and wholly misleading, in my opinion, at worst. Join me as I introduce to you the woman that brought this modern myth turned modern misconception to life, Adrienne Mayer, a classical folklorist, who, at least at the start of her Griffin research, prided herself on being an outsider looking in. She posits her theory saying that the Griffin was, quote, no simple composite, and that she sought to, quote, rescue the ancient Greeks who found, even searched out those big bones from modern scholars' condescending charge that the Greeks' interpretations of prehistoric remains was, quote, inside of her, quote, primitive, ignorant, unenlightened, unscientific, end quote. Wow! That's a lot. That's a lot right there. This makes no sense on, like, any level to me, personally. And it doesn't make any sense to the paper either. What do you mean it's no simple composite? We literally have the two animals that make up the two ends of this creature. It's not simple. It has, like, symbolism. Like the lions being the rulers of the land and eagles being the rulers of the air. Them being in this chimera is a symbol of them being the king of beasts of sorts. Not to mention, if you'll allow me to kind of riff off the paper for a second, in ancient Egyptian art, the griffins have falcon heads, directly tying them to Horus, you know, the god that the pharaoh was supposed to be the manifestation of. This person has clearly never heard the term Occam's razor before. Wow, that might be a little mean, but it's applicable. Am I wrong? That's not even to mention, like, the other half of that statement. You put Greeks and primitive in the same sentence and made probably one of the most ridiculous claims I've ever heard. That modern academia would stop sucking the Greeks' dicks for long enough to give them a critique. As you can imagine, that was not in the original paper. The paper obviously points out that this being a composite is the most likely case, Occam's razor, once again. Mayer states that the reason she made this connection is because she was at a Greek exhibit and saw how the griffins were depicted. Quote, their powerful beaks, empty eye sockets, leathery necks, and bumpy skulls. She was, quote, struck by a sense of deja vu. They seem so prehistoric. What do you mean by that? The paper rips this point apart like that comment means nothing. That correlation in her head is basically an it looks like argument. And it's not even a good one in my opinion. The paper points out, positing the question, are rhinos with leathery necks suddenly prehistoric now? Are late Cretaceous mammals that are small and furry not prehistoric? It's a nothing statement that feels like it came right out of the mouth of someone who was thinking about this image while saying it. So Mayer's geomyth is confusing because what she claims doesn't really line up. Sometimes her geomyth says that the Protoceratops inspired the creation of the griffin, but sometimes it's inspired aspects of the griffin. Like, in a few works, she states that the griffin is, quote, the earliest documented attempt to visualize a prehistoric animal from fossil remains. So that means she has to believe that these fossils influenced the oldest versions of these myths. And that's where this hypothesis really starts to kind of fall apart. Mayer states that the Greeks ended up adopting folklore to the griffin brought to them by the Isodonians, who were nomadic peoples that lived in Scythia but weren't Scythian. The Scythians were like a related group but different. I don't know. So according to Mayer, she thinks the Greeks in the 5th century heard tales of gold-guarding beasts living in the desert from the Isodonians, and that the Isodonians prospecting in Mongolia led them to encountering Protoceratops fossils, and that they shared these stories with the Greeks, who equated these stories to the griffins. So already we have no Greeks searching out or finding any fossils, just hearing stories of fossils from the Isodonians. So that line earlier about her trying to rescue the Greeks really doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Anyway, she goes on to state that Protoceratops' proposed biology influenced how the griffins behaved in legend. Her main argument for this being the idea that the griffin became a nest-building, egg-laying creature after tales of these beasts from the Isodonians. Mayer says this came from the abundance of fossil eggs at Protoceratops sites that aren't Protoceratops eggs, but that's not really important. I think someone forgot that birds lay eggs and nest. Mayer, birds, they lay eggs and they nest. You know that, right? Like, I know she knows that. She also says that the griffin came from real-life entities rather than fantastic creations. Are you serious right now? Yeah, Mayor! Yeah! They are based off of real-life entities! They're called birds! And cats! As you can see, this doesn't really sound like the griffin was an attempt to make sense of prehistoric bones at all. More like they got more lore added to them because of a misidentification. But even that doesn't really hold water, because if you look at this nifty graph, you'll see right here, griffins show egg-laying behavior hundreds of years before they were supposed to know about these fossils. Birds lay eggs and nest, Mayor! What do you mean? Mayor does acknowledge that griffins have a deeper history, like once, I think. She has no explanation for how the earliest depictions correlate to Protoceratops, though, since Protoceratops is supposed to be, like, a heavy influence on their design, right? The whole line about them being prehistoric is supposed to help corroborate this. But from the evidence given, that can't be the case. The griffin was already well established as a quadrupedal, winged, beaked animal long before they appeared in Greek myth. Also, the Greeks definitely didn't get their griffin legends from Central Asia. They got them from the Near East. Egypt and Persia being two specific examples I can think of. They took on quite a bit of characteristics from these depictions. The paper gives us a wonderful visual depiction of the dispersal of the griffin myth based off of archaeology on part A and the griffin geomyth on part B. I'm just gonna let you pause to look at this because it's so funny going from highly documented distribution to question marks everywhere. The funny part of this whole thing, to me at least, is that I haven't even really gotten to the slam dunk yet. One of the pillars of Mayer's argument is that alluvial gold deposits along the Isodonian trade routes line up with Cretaceous fossil deposits that have Protoceratops in them. Which, part of that is true. There are Cretaceous fossil deposits along the Isodonian trade route. Do you hear the problem, though? I said Cretaceous fossil beds, not Protoceratops fossil beds. Yeah, there's no overlap with Protoceratops sites and gold deposits. They're literally hundreds of miles away from each other, and the Scythian archaeological sites that have been found in the area have been even further away from any fossil site with Protoceratops, as you can see by this image here. Like, I guess she thinks that these traders are going to go out of their way to find Protoceratops fossils in an area with no gold or any other reason to be there other than it makes Mayer's theory look better. An important note, since Mayer's geomyth hinges on this connection between Protoceratops and gold deposits, If Protoceratops fossils were found near gold, we would know about it. They would have put that in their notes somewhere. That's like prime field journal material right there. And lastly, because legitimately out of all of these papers, you need to read this one. It was a blast to go through, but I also need to stop because this last bit kind of hurt me a little bit, and if I keep talking about it, I will physically combust. As a way to explain away the fact that Protoceratops fossils and gold deposits don't overlap, she proposes that desert storms can pick up gold nuggets or gold particles and throw them hundreds of miles for a chance encounter with a Protoceratops nest, I guess. I mean, it's not a Protoceratops nest, it's just a nest that was attributed to you know what I mean! She states, quote, a sand blizzard in the Gobi can transport pebbles the size of sand dollars. Gold is really famously dense. She legitimately is trying so hard to make the facts fit her hypothesis, and not the other way around like it's supposed to be. Come on, man. Sandstorms picking up gold nuggets and tossing them hundreds of miles? Be for real. I highly recommend, again, you reading this paper yourself. It goes over a lot of things I didn't end up going into, and this hypothesis made me like actually wanna throw a little bit of a fit. It made me want to throw a BF. Made me want to throw a bitch fit. I didn't even mention the biological bullshit going on here with broken fills being misidentified as wings somehow. I don't know. I don't know if Mayer does either, to be honest with you. So I took the fighting dinosaurs fossil and I replaced the velociraptor with a velociraptor. A velociraptor griffin. I had to figure out how to make a griffin somewhat recognizable, but with just things in the late Cretaceous. With, like, just an avian-looking front. Technically, it's a non-avian looking front, but shut. And a mammalian back. Like, I could not just slap a big cat on the back of that. They hadn't evolved yet, so it would feel weird to do that. So I chose this to make up the back half, a late Cretaceous Mongolian mammal, because this fossil was found in Mongolia, fun fact. So honestly, this was the perfect excuse to draw it. And that will bring us to the end of 2024 Paleo Rewind, at least for June. All of the other people have all of their other months out, because I am really late on this video. Sorry about that. But happy belated holidays to everyone. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Merry Kwanzaa, whatever else you celebrate, and have a Happy New Year. And thanks again to Edge and everyone on the Discord for being so cool, and interact with this video however you feel comfortable, you know. All of my docs are in the description box below. Make sure to check out Raptor Chatter's video if you feel like it, and goodbye.